Hey everyone, welcome back to the 443 Security Simplified. I'm your host, Mark the Liberty, and joining me today is
Corey Bluetooth Lovin' Knockreiner. Oh, wrong year. There we go.
everyone else loves your Bluetooth too, Corey. Anyways, on today's episode, we will discuss some vulnerability research into a popular system on a chip for Bluetooth headphones. But before that, we dive into an interesting research post on a phishing campaign abusing a very risky Microsoft 365 feature before giving an update on what the heck is going on at Marks & Spencer and all of their ransomware stuff. With that, let's go ahead and link our way in, like Bluetooth, because you link them.
Yeah.
Does that work?
Blue snarf our way in, snarf our way in? I don't know.
You'll never hear me say snarf our way in. Oh, crap, I just said it.
Success!
So, Corey, let's start this week. There was a cool kind of article, or at least research, that came out of Varonis's MDR team describing a ongoing phishing campaign that they detected. So far, it's targeted, they said, 70 organizations, almost entirely based in the United States, something like 95% of them. This campaign started in May, so just last month, but it's abusing an interesting feature in Microsoft 365 that many admins may not be aware is a potential risk. So Microsoft 365 has this feature called Direct Send that allows like on-premises devices or apps or even cloud services to send an email on behalf of an organization, as long as the sender for that message is from the organization's domain. So like watchguard.com, for example. It's supposed to be used for things like printers or scanners or other devices that might want to send an email without having to authenticate, that awful burden of having to prove your identity before sending a message. But clearly, if you don't set it up correctly or secure it, it could introduce a lot of risk. There was even research like earlier this year, I think, on this as a specific, or I guess 2 years ago, on a specific like primitive for phishing, as the article Corey is pulling up shows, where they already knew that like any unauthenticated way to send a message on behalf of an organization, that's bad news if you're not using SPF or DMARC to validate those messages. In this specific example, the attackers use a PowerShell script to send an email message using the organization's smart host. So like when you sign up for Microsoft 365 with Exchange Online, you get a domain, a server that's called a smart host. So like watchguard.mail.protection.outlook.com. And if you've got this feature turned on, Direct Send, as long as the from address is at watchguard.com in this case, it will accept it and try and send the message. They noted that the actual phishing messages, they pretended to be like voicemail or fax notifications. They'd have a PDF attachment. The PDF was even branded with the recipient's like company logo. It didn't actually have a link in the PDF. It had a QR code to then get the victim into scanning the QR code, which brings them to a fake Microsoft 365 login. So like before we jump into the direct send thing real quick, the QR code in a PDF seems to have really been taking off with phishing lately. Like I don't know, Corey, it feels like we've gotten pretty good collectively at like blocking malicious URLs and attachments and emails. But a QR code, like by nature, that usually means they're pulling out their phone to go scan it. Their phone probably doesn't have the same types of protections that their like work machine has. And it feels like a good opportunity for attackers then to circumvent some of those protections and potentially succeed even more. I don't know. What are your thoughts on that one?
I completely agree. I mean, we made a prediction about it, right? I think it was one of the kind of meh predictions we did last year, where we said a QR code would be the root cause of a headline grabbing attack. And we had many cases of QR codes being used in a lot of campaigns like this, but we didn't really see the headline grabbing attack, which is why we didn't rate ourselves as passing on that prediction. But obviously, we know this is a problem. And like you say, all the email security protections, defenses, controls are really good at catching malicious files, malicious links, but only a few have started doing image processing to see if there's a QR code and do something about it. So I think it's a good mechanism, unfortunately, for attackers because less people think about it. And there's something you can do as a user, but you really have to be up on your game. Like, unfortunately, QR codes make it really easy to go to a link right away. And you really have to figure out your phone, because, like you say, you're usually doing it on your phone's specific features for displaying that URL with the QR code before you go to it. I hate that Apple actually will only show you a shortened link until you hold down in a certain way. You can still see the full link before doing it, but you have to know the magic gesture, like the secret way to do it, and it's probably different on Android. So it's a big problem. And the biggest part of the problem is I don't think anyone's going to give up QR codes. They are here to stay. Even I find them convenient for like device login when it moves it to your phone to make it easier to type and stuff. So it's definitely something the vendors have to pay attention to. At the very least, security awareness on QR codes. And better yet, we need to start getting email security controls that are better at image processing to actually find the URL from the QR code and then do the same type of URL check we do nowadays to make sure it's not malicious.
Yeah. And then moving on to the like direct send feature that these threat actors are abusing, like even Microsoft, they noted in their own documentation for this that only advanced users should even be using this potential feature. So when you look at their product docs, it says we recommend direct send only for advanced customers willing to take on the responsibilities of email server admins. You will need to be familiar with setting up and following best practices for sending email over the internet. When correctly configured and managed, direct send is a secure and viable option, but customers run the risk of misconfiguration that disrupts the mail flow or threatens the security of their communication. Which, I mean, in hindsight, it's obvious. A unauthenticated endpoint, if you don't have other controls in place, is a big issue. Which is why, like Varonis in their report, they gave some remediation recommendations. Like they recommend straight up disabling direct send. There's like a reject direct send setting in Exchange. Also, making sure your organization's SPF records are set to fail or block a message if it fails, and having a DMARC policy set to reject for your domain too. Because even if you leave it open and someone spoofs your domain through it to send a message, if you've got your mail server or your email security properly configured to check SPF, it would block it from making it to the inbox. That is a good protection for this specific type of threat.
By the way, have you looked at any like DMARC and SPF? DKIM, DMARC is a mix of SPF and DKIM, and they're simply settings that tie a certificate to your domain so people can't spoof your domain. I'm very high level what it does. I suspect many corporations, despite DMARC being out for ages and ages, many corporations may not use it may not use it at all because, if you're a smaller company, maybe you're just ignorant of it. Or, some of them may use it, but sometimes when you have to make exceptions for things like this, you may use it in a way that doesn't really work well and you end up still getting spoofed emails. I'm just curious, Mark, do you have any gut feelings on that? Or do you know how many corporations are actually using DMARC properly nowadays?
So dmarc.org looks like they maintain statistics on this. And as of 2022, so that's the last time they updated this, so 3 years ago, there's still 70% of orgs don't have don't even have a DMARC policy, and only 20% were set to reject. They were showing a increase in percentage or a growth in adoption. And if we extrapolate that, like just ballpark math here, I'd say it's probably 50% would still be at none if it was following the same trend. But I mean, so the complexity comes from most organizations, they don't have just a single email server anymore. Like it used to be, you'd have an email server on-prem. Your SPF record would just be your public IP that email server exits out of, and that's all you had to do. But many orgs use things like MailChimp or like other marketing email capabilities. Uh,
I won't tell our VP of marketing you said that.
for like us at WatchGuard, we send messages from WatchGuard Cloud, which is a number of like AWS egress endpoints. Like the complexities of even sending a message and the number of message sources you might have in a company can be huge. And that's where a lot of the complexity comes from and the room for mistake. Where like if you allow list, let's say the entirety of Amazon's IP space, that means anything else in Amazon or that shared hosting provider could send messages on behalf of your domain. So there is like there's room for error and there's room for abuse if one of these providers that we all collectively use suffers a compromise. In fact, there was a Mailchimp issue a couple of years ago now where they had a authentication vulnerability where their users could send messages on behalf of other domains.
Oh
And because
gosh.
people allow listed Mailchimp as like SPF for their domains, it was just open season for spoofing messages.
Yeah.
So emails, it's one of those like it feels like it should be easy to secure. Like you think we would be able to figure this out by now, but the complexities are
Hybrid
hiding
IT
beneath the surface.
infrastructure. We That's the downside to SaaS and the public cloud. Even though it makes us innovative and be able to move quickly without infrastructure, it does complicate things, and everyone knows complicated and security are kind of oil and water. It means you're going to have to take more work. But I think the main takeaway, it sounds like, is even though it is complicated to set up DMARC properly, for the small companies out there that haven't even tried, 50% not trying is still pretty big. While it may not help for the issue me and Mark are talking about, because at the end of the day, it was using the domain, it's a huge, you should be doing it. It cuts out so much email spoofing, and it will help your company invest some time to at least try to turn it on, especially if you have a very basic email setup. And like Mark just, talked about, if you are more complicated in all the ways you're sending email, it is still probably important to take the time to try to fine tune that over time, because it can help for a lot of email threats. And I suspected that a lot of people didn't use it. It is good to know that more and more people are using it, according to those dmark.org stats.
The one like devil's in the details for that one. Like so at WatchGuard, like our team is the one that has to review messages that do get blocked. And we probably once a month have to go reach out to like a vendor that someone else at WatchGuard's working with to like get a hold of their IT team to tell them to fix their SPF records, so that we can receive their emails, because like we do SPF validation and when it fails, like it's our end user that complains, why am I not getting these messages? And it's us that have to go deal with the other IT team to say, hey, can you adopt these security practices from 1998, please?
Feels a little bit like, what is the RFC that just asks all organizations and ISPs to do IP spoofing checks on private addresses? It's the type of
Yeah,
situation where if 1% of ISPs don't have it turned on, it's still a problem. So I guess what you're saying is the entire industry needs to get on board with the right SPF, and that will raise all ships if everyone does it correctly and invests a little bit of time in it.
agreed. Well said. So moving on, then the second story. This is one that I've been yelled at by some of our UK sales team and our partners for not discussing yet. And I think there's been enough like updates on this news story that there's actually some interesting things to pick out of it. So back in April, the major British retailer Marks and Spencer paused online orders up until like today, or like at least this week. So like 2 months basically after suffering a apparent ransomware attack, along with like the disrupting their sales of online orders, issues with shipments and like empty shelves. They also said some personal customer data was taken during the attack. And while it did include like PII, thankfully it didn't include things like passwords or credit card details. So we know April timeframe, they suffered a breach, ransomware, some stolen data, lots of encrypted data, enough to disrupt their online platform. And since then, like there's been more details slowly starting to leak out of this one. Like for example, it's now been linked to Scattered Spider, which is a financially motivated threat actor that seems to target like whole industries at a time. So like this was during their retail phase. They've now, as we'll discuss in a bit, moved on to their airline phase. We know that that Scattered Spider used the China-based Dragon Force ransomware as a service. In fact, the CEO of Marks and Spencer even got an email from like the Dragon Force operators, basically saying, "Hey, we stole all your crap. You better pay us, but don't worry, we can work this out together," kind of thing. Early on, Marks and Spencer said that this incident was caused by a unnamed third party. Very quickly, that unnamed third party was unofficially reported as Tata Consultant Service, or TCS, which is the absolutely massive managed service provider and managed IT provider for many big organizations globally. Funny enough, so that ransom note, effectively, that Marks and Spencer's CEO got was actually sent from a TCS employee from at least one of their compromised accounts. So, like, all signs kind of point to at least them being somewhat involved. The original reports were they were potentially the cause, but TCS just put out a statement this last week after a month-long investigation where they said, and I'm going to quote this specifically because I think there's some omission in here potentially. They said, "No TCS systems or users were compromised, and none of our other customers are impacted by this specific incident." Now, on the face of it, that sounds like a "we weren't involved" statement, but there was a anonymous Reddit post that you have to take with a grain of salt. It was on r/cybersecurity just like a week or so ago. But they claim to be involved, like they're an M&S employee involved in the investigation. And they claim basically that statement is like a lie by omission in it, where they claim that it's true that TCS's own systems were not compromised, but that Scattered Spider specifically targeted TCS because of what they said were systemic weaknesses in their service desk operations, with things like poor training, no verification for caller identity, no adherence to basic security protocols, even when asked by the client, and a lack of oversight and quality assurance.
So that's kind of implying that even if TCS's systems weren't breached, if a service desk person actually gives away a credential, or more specifically gives a reset mechanism to an external person that's not properly validated, that could give a credential to another company, in this case, Marks and Spencer. So there's plenty of ways a third-party organization can be part of a digital supply chain attack without actually having their infrastructure or products compromised. It's the service was compromised.
The story they're painting here is, so TCS runs effectively the IT service desk for Marks and Spencer. And Scattered Spider called them up numerous times. In fact, they said they got 4 of the call recordings from TCS on this.
Oh, wow.
And in 3 of the call recordings, they say the service desk reset the password and re-enrolled MFA with like 0 resistance. The caller just gave a name. There was no validation or callback or anything else. They just went ahead and reset their password and re-enrolled their new MFA authenticator. On the 4th one that they had a call recording for, the attacker requested access to a privileged group. TCS, to their credit, did ask for a M&S employee ID, but the ID that the attacker gave did not match the company's format even, and the access to the group was granted anyway.
What?
And they said that, yeah.
What? Yeah. How can you get a wrong thing and then say, okay, I'm still going to do this? That should have been a huge... I mean, I know we're talking about internal whistleblowers, so we have to be somewhat skeptical, but if that is true, my goodness.
It implies they either had no way of validating the employee ID, or they validated it, said that's wrong, and said, screw it, and decided to do it anyway. So this unnamed, or this anonymous whistleblower, which again, this is all like hearsay. They also said that there were at least 100 known other recordings of similar social engineering against TCS. And when they asked for those recordings, TCS came back and said, "Oh, they've been deleted. Sorry." So it looks like that is the potential intrusion point. And I mentioned earlier that like Scattered Spider, how they operate, they go after an entire industry and people in the industry all at once. At around the same time, they also targeted Co-op and Harrods, 2 other UK retailers, both of which are also TCS customers. just this last week, the U.S. Put out an alert for U.S. airlines being targeted, specifically mentioning Hawaiian Airlines and Alaska Airlines, which are now merged. They are also TCS customers. So there's a lot of smoke, at least here, even if there isn't any direct like
Yeah,
statement of guilt or direct evidence to it.
ton of
And
smoke. It's
I'm
going to come out.
maybe this is my bias, but it absolutely is my bias. But I could understand why this would be the case, where a like outsourced service desk in this case could be more prone to social engineering if they are not properly trained on how to do it. So, but I mean, we can extrapolate. Like TCS is the extreme of managed service providers. Like they do it for massive companies at huge scales. But like similar attacks, like they probably are being sent to just normal MSPs, like the folks that listen to this podcast too. Like this is something that you need to be aware of.
Absolutely. We've said it before, MSPs are a huge target. I mean, I think it was 3 years ago now, right, Mark? But there were a number of small US based MSPs that have been targeted specifically with ransomware. They know that an MSP has some sort of endpoint management control system. And if they can get a MSP's credential and log into that, they not only can turn off security, they can actually use the endpoint security control system to pass and execute executables on computers, which they did with a number of, like, none of these were the fault of, say, WebRoot, but they got access to a WebRoot administrative control. So we've talked many times about MSPs wanting to allow their analysts to do remote management. But if you just expose something online and you don't have MFA on a credential, and you don't have good enough security practices that your employees' credentials leak, you become a huge target because they know that an MSP touches a small MSP at least tens of customers, but potentially hundreds, and let alone the amount of endpoints behind those customers. So we've known MSPs are a target.
And
We're
then
very MSP friendly at WatchGuard, though. Like, we are literally here to help MSPs bring security to small to medium businesses and mid market ones, because a small company doesn't have security, and often a MSP has better security expertise than the average really small company. But just as an MSP, you're kind of like the same as us as a security vendor. We're a target, me and Mark's company, as security vendors. So you definitely need to up your game because bad guys are going to go after you.
and then when it comes to like social engineering your help desk, like if one of your clients calls in saying, "Hey, I'm locked out and I need my password reset or need a new authenticator on my phone," like hopefully you're doing some form of validation on that. Like
Strong
first off,
validation.
you should probably already have a callback phone number for those users. Like if you're using Active Directory, it's pretty easy to set phone numbers for users.
That's a good tip.
First step is hang up and call them back.
Yeah.
Second step would be validate something that only they should know. So like maybe another record stored in like an HR system or something like that, or maybe like an asset tag or something that they physically have in their possession. Because I mean, I would not trust even like a video call at this point of someone calling in saying, "Hey, it's me, Corey. I need to reset my
Yeah.
password." Like even that can be
Thank you.
spooky.
Thank you, AI and deepfakes. I have a question for you, Mark, and this is purely for fun, and this is where we can let our bias out. What do you think about the internal employee whistleblowing? Let me set it up by saying you and I actually believe in transparency. Like, we think if there's a vulnerability or a breach to even our company, we would like to share as much information as we can. Now, there are investigatory and legal reasons that businesses, even the ones that want transparency, have to be careful of what they share. But our goal is, like, if a customer is affected, we want to let them know. And I think you and I believe, even if it's a breach, being able to share some detail about what happened and how you could rectify it is a benefit to the entire community. So we do believe in this information getting out. And we don't believe in, unless there's really strong legal reasons for omissions, which there sometimes are with investigations, we tend to not like omissions. But on the flip side, it's technically against like an internal employee doing that is probably breaking NDA and doing things. So any thought? I suspect, like I think you do, that this whistleblower may be telling the truth. But any thoughts on if that's a malicious action? That's kind of gray hat, hard to guess. Like you have to know. What do you think about the whistleblower?
I it is nuanced. So
Yeah.
if we assume that they are correct, like that, or that they're telling the truth, then I think that like TCS's public statement trying to make it look like they weren't uh, the cause of this by like a carefully worded, none of our systems were affected. I think that is where like the line gets drawn to like call them out on their BS.
Especially with what you just said, like this started with MS, but now we're starting to see many other organizations that are not the same company but have the connection via TCS. So in some ways you could say by TCS hiding details, it might make other corporations that use them not know it. So now
But
that
I'm
we're
also
learning new, yeah, go ahead.
I'm not willing to say like every single like similar incident someone should like blow the whistle because there's gray area, there's nuance to this. Like
Absolutely.
you mentioned, if there's an active investigation and like the information you put out there could impact the ability to like have longer term impacts on the threat actor doing it or bringing
Yep.
him to justice or whatever, like that is a situation where I would not support
By the
something
way,
like
and Mark doesn't just bring that up randomly. We've talked about Cyclops Blink before, where we
that.
were working with organizations like the NCSC and the FBI, and there were things we were asked not to do specifically to help catch these folks and not spook them.
Yeah. Like if someone internally at WatchGuard at that point had been, hey, did you hear about what's going on? Like it would have totally screwed our ability to just successfully disrupt that
Dismantle the
threat.
botnet. Yeah.
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 But in this case, what pushes it over the edge for me is if we assume it's true, the misleading statement that came from TCS. But that is still a big, assuming a anonymous user on Reddit is telling
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
truth, which is a pretty big leap in some cases. But it's not outside the realm of possibility. It tracks with
Especially with the smoke you're talking about. I
yeah,
think this story we might have an update if there's that much smoke. Things tend to come out. We'll find
yeah.
out, I guess. But yeah, like I'm with you on don't trust everything you read online, especially on Reddit, even though it is a cool resource too. But yeah, I this one feels like I'm more willing to accept this as truth adjacent, at least for now, especially
Yeah.
with the detail you mentioned was in there.
And I think like my big takeaway from this is like as a service provider, your job is to provide value to that client and not to introduce like risks or weak points for them. And so many of the folks currently listening right now probably offer this sort of service where they are the IT help desk for smaller organizations, which means you are the ones responsible for securing those interactions too and making sure you've got the processes in place to make sure you can't get socially engineered into giving up the keys to the kingdom to another organization. And I'd like to think the folks listening right now probably already have that and probably preach into the choir. But that is, I think, critical
I
as a
absolutely
takeaway from
agree.
this.
I think what's more critical is when you see things like this, or if something like this happens to you, actually doing something about it and being like caring about like not just sweeping it under the rug, but taking care of it. Because I will add to the only statement I wanted to add, Mark, is we're humans, MSPs, even ones with security expertise, you're going to make mistakes. You're going to have vulnerabilities in your strategy of securing different things, software if you have it. We at WatchGuard are human and we have had vulnerabilities. So uh, it's not every MSP probably might find a weak point at some point, but care enough to fix it quickly. And I know you're running a business and don't want to hurt your business, but I actually think if you do something that is disingenuous when something like this happens, which TCS may or may not be doing, we'll find out. Uh, you're going to lose more business than if you're just transparent about it and then talk about all the steps you're doing to change the situation. We didn't have the proper service desk validation in this one case. We saw one of our users not pay enough attention to an ID that was given. We've taken corrective actions. Here's the things we did. I bet you even if TCS was part of the vector, their customers would even appreciate that. But I get it's a nuanced situation. So I agree
It
with
is
you.
a that's
Yeah.
an important point though. Like these should be learning opportunities for everyone, period. Like I mean, it was what, 2 weeks ago where Google took down like half the internet with a config error in the Google Cloud APIs that caused like their IAM authentication to break, which caused a whole bunch of crap to break for about half an hour. And one of the things that Google does really well is they put out a big incident report of here's what went wrong specifically, here's the timeline, here's the decisions that led to it, the actions we took, and then like what is our approach to make sure this never happens again. And that is such a great learning opportunity for people even outside Google to think of like, oh crap, I never thought of that situation, pushing this
Yeah.
minor code error that then gets triggered 2 months later for this thing. Like everyone can learn from it. And like a security incident like this, like if they were to put out a, mea culpa, here's what we did wrong and what we're doing to improve it, everyone else could implement those same
Yeah.
learnings too.
And not only are you helping everyone, the customers who are mad at you, like what you're afraid of as a business is losing customers because if you were the vector, M&S is probably a little mad at you. But that means that how you react and what you do is going to, people are forgiving, people understand mistakes happen, people, so to me, if you ever want to continue business, hiding something, there's a good chance it might come out and then you really will go under or your CISO or CTO will go to jail like has happened for or at least have a lawsuit. But if you actually do that mea culpa and get better, I think even the folks that might be upset about downtime in Google's case, or they could find a way to understand and turn it around and actually realize that you're going to be even more secure from this learning and will take some extra steps. So
Yep.
transparency is good when you can do it. We understand there's some caveats to that, but every time we've seen security organizations or companies hide this stuff, it tends to come out and then they get hammered even harder than they ever would have if they just took care of it openly.
Yep. So I guess this is probably not the end of this story. Like I imagine with the size of some of these customers that were impacted, some of these organizations that were impacted, one of them will probably put out some incident analysis of exactly what happened and we'll get some more news later. But
Yeah. Well,
yeah.
at least see if they blame a third party provider too, whether or not the third party provider agrees or not.
Yep. We shall see. So moving on to the last story, this one's a pretty fun one. Where I saw a research post from a German cybersecurity firm called ERNW. Sure, that stands for something with way too many syllables for me to ever try and pronounce in German. But they published a blog post just last week describing their vulnerability research into the Aroha system on a chip, which is used by a large number of Bluetooth headphones and earbuds. Some of the big names like Bose Quiet Comfort, the Sony WF and WH series, which I think the ones in my ears right now are Sony WHs, WFs. They're one of them. This thing is so dang worn down. I'll never be. Oh, WFs. Yeah. JBL, Jabra, Marshall, like a whole bunch of big name brands use this system on a chip to handle like the actual computing that goes on inside these tiny little earbuds and headphones.
I'm happy
Uh,
that the Bose Quiet Comfort one, Quiet Comfort's a huge brand, are the earbuds and not the normal cans. Otherwise, I would be affected too.
that's fair. So they're not sharing all the details yet, but they did give a high level overview of 3 vulnerabilities they discovered in a custom debugging protocol that's exposed via both Bluetooth Low Energy and Bluetooth Classic on like any of these devices, or at least these specific devices that are using the Aroha reference SDK. Basically, it was designed for like diagnostics and even some app features, but it's not necessarily made for like production releases of the SDK for whatever you build on top of it. There was 3 vulnerabilities. 2 of them were just missing authentication in the Bluetooth Low Energy and the Bluetooth Classic services that lets anyone within Bluetooth range of these devices interact with this debugging interface. And the third one was a
By the way,
arbitrary.
for
Yeah,
Bluetooth range, everyone throws out around 10 meters. But just so you guys know, with Bluetooth sniping, if a hacker really wants to target this, it can actually be much further away.
yeah. Get a Pringle can and some wire, and you can get a Bluetooth device from at least across the parking
I
lot.
feel like the distance, I don't know for sure. It's like a Bluetooth sniping versus the Pringle can usually is Wi-Fi, and I think the distance between the nail, like in a Yagi, it depends on the spectrum. So Bluetooth probably inside the Pringles can has a slightly different antenna, but the same concept would still work.
A half-size Pringles can, then the snack size. Where was it? So the third issue is the one that causes the damages. It's an arbitrary memory read-write vulnerability in that debugging interface, which lacks authentication no matter which way you access it. So they gave a couple of examples. There's one where they could read arbitrary memory to see things like which song is playing, phone numbers, both the sender and the recipient for phone calls, or even like the call history, basically anything the Bluetooth device might have access to support functionality you might be using. They gave an example of extracting the Bluetooth linking keys from a headset and then using them to impersonate that headset with a previously paired phone to then trigger like a phone call to an arbitrary number. Because when you pair a device that basically uses cryptography, and if you can rip those keys out of memory, you can reuse them. They mentioned that this is a wormable exploit with a bit of work because they can rewrite the firmware to gain code execution. So presumably could overwrite my headphones with this wormable one when I walk by Corey, hops over and overwrites his, and soon you have a botnet made of earbuds across the entirety of the United States. But like long story short, this is actually a pretty difficult one to fix because it's not really a vulnerability in like the code for a single headphone. It's a vulnerability in a piece of software used by many of these manufacturers that use this same system on a chip. So they have to, every single one of them, go implement a fix for it. Now, Aeroha, however the heck you pronounce it, they did put out an update to their SDK just, I think, like a couple weeks or a month ago. But like as with any IoT or like embedded technology, it is probably going to take some time for that to trickle through to all of these impacted manufacturers and their impacted devices.
By the
So,
way,
yeah,
oh, sorry. I can't remember if you mentioned it, but some might think, okay, this is a Bluetooth vulnerability in headphones. Yeah, you might be able to get phone numbers and some of this, but it can't be a big deal. But one of the, if you're really thinking advanced actors, it is kind of a big deal to journey. I mean, there are people where phone numbers and definitely being able to start fake calls from or to you is a huge deal. So journalists, diplomats, and corp execs. So it might feel niche, and it is niche, but vulnerabilities like this can sometimes have really like asymmetric power that you don't think about.
like let's picture an attack scenario. So like let's say nation that's oppressive towards journalists, like Saudi Arabia, where occasionally they dismember them. Let's say they know a journalist, they're trying to find their contacts, for example. They're probably already surveilling that journalist. They probably know which headphones or earbuds they use, so they can write the exploit for this for that specific model if it's vulnerable to it. Then walk by them at one point during the day, exploit it, and dump their contact list, and then like cross reference that
Yeah,
with other
yeah.
government officials or NGO officials. Like it sounds James Bondy, but this is actually a somewhat practical attack
And
against a
getting a
specifically
phone
targeted
number, or
individual.
someone like a nation state could take advantage of local telcos and track the whereabouts with triangulation. And
Yep.
while this was ended up not being a complete cyber attack, but we talked it like as niche as this sounds. Remember, I think it was back in one of the Middle Eastern countries where a nation state got both a physical access to a supply chain, but also added code to pagers with explosives in them. And, so it sounds crazy. It sounds like something out of a movie, but we've seen nation state actors do this level of stuff. So it's
The
important to
pager
update
thing
your
was
headphones.
crazy and out of a movie, though. I still can't believe that was a
It happened. It
successful
literally
multi-year operation.
happened.
It's crazy. But like I think this is still like, you have to be pretty targeted for this one. This isn't
Yeah.
going to be like well, let me backtrack that.
I could see this
This is
be a fun
something,
griefing. This would be a prank one. Like hackers do just, I mean, that you are less scared of, but I could see people pranking with this when the
this is
exploits become
exactly what I
public.
was about to say. I could imagine
Yeah.
this being a DEF CON vulnerability where if you're
Yes.
walking around with your Bluetooth headphones in, suddenly you get rickrolled or something.
All the old
Like,
Wi-Fi ones where you could man in the middle them through Wi-Fi and replace images with disgusting stuff. Those are the exact type of vulnerabilities they love to have used at
yep.
DEF CON. So I imagine this will happen. We'll definitely have to turn off. I won't be able to use my AirPods at DEF CON until they
Yeah.
fix. Although I don't think AirPods are on the list.
But like
But
outside of those two extremes, like you are a target of a hostile nation state and you're attending DEF CON, like in the middle there, there's
you're probably
probably
fine.
not a whole lot of practical impact from this one.
Yeah.
But either ways, like if you definitely check out the research post, if you are using a affected model, like stay on the lookout for the latest security updates for them. Like I get regular like monthly updates for Sony for mostly performance stuff, but I imagine they'll probably have a security fix here soon if they haven't already. So definitely stay up to date on that, like you would any other embedded device. But man, yeah, new fear unlocked next time I go attend a hacking conference, because I do
More
walk around
things
with
we
my
have to
headphones
turn
in.
off.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I don't
so
like
one of the
talking
things
to
I still
people.
use. As social anxiety people have to have that protection.
Crap, maybe it's time to get AirPods instead. Ugh.
Oh no, I'm pushing you more. Your wife pushed you to Apple, and now threat researchers are too. Although
No,
they'll have
thank
their
you.
Bluetooth vulnerability eventually.
Well, yeah, maybe. I don't know. It's anything is hackable, but Apple does tend to do a pretty good job of locking their stuff down to a fault. But
Probably because
we'll
they're trying
see.
to lock their profits down too.
Exactly.
No open garden for you, but you have to pay our high prices.
Yeah, man. Anyways, yeah, careful who you're walking by if you've got one of the affected Bluetooth headsets, because could get real quick. Hey everyone, thanks again for listening. As always, if you enjoyed today's episode, don't forget to rate, review, and subscribe. If you have any questions on today's topics or suggestions for future episode topics, you can reach out to us on Blue Sky. I'm at itsmark.me. Corey's at SecAdept. Both of us are on Instagram at watchguard_technologies. Thanks again for listening. I'm off for holiday for the next 2 weeks, so you'll probably get a best of episode, but we'll chat with you again in a couple of weeks.